Let's talk about your background. So how did you get into coding?
Okay, so originally when I was a teenager, I was big into gaming,
Uh-huh.
LAN parties, yeah, every weekend playing games, and I think that's where my sort of interest in computing came from.
Hmm.
Building computers, networking, that sort of thing, and then the coding aspect of it really came from. I was trying to think back of when I originally first made my first ever, program. And I
Right.
think, I think it was a script for like a multiplayer game server. I think that's what it was, right? Like a bash script or something to get something to run.
Yeah.
And I think inadvertently that sort of started I've always been a builder and a tinkerer, and I think that, I mean, software is, it's using computers to build things
Mm.
and you get that instant feedback. So I think
Hmm.
for me, it ticks a lot of those boxes. So I think my personal nature of building and tweaking,
Mm.
and obviously when I started coding, well, ever since it's just been growing and growing and growing, right? So it
Right.
was a good career path at the time. So it
Mm.
just made sense for me to sort of move into that. I mean, think if I hadn't have gone into coding, it would have been more IT administration, and that's what a lot of my friends do.
Okay.
I've got a lot of friends that are like IT administrators, so that sort of aspect really.
So is that more working on the hardware than the software?
Yeah. So like setting up hardware configurations,
Yeah.
networks, and things like that. And I think there's huge amount of sort of opportunity in that field as well.
Oh,
But I
definitely.
think I just sort of slid into the software side because I wrote too many scripts than I should have done back in the day, basically.
Wonderful, wonderful. What did you do before it? What did you do before coding?
Um, I didn't actually. I've never had another professional job other than coding. Obviously, had my part-time work that I did, sort of on this, whilst I was at school and college and things like that. And I started coding straight from college. I never went to university.
Right.
I was lucky enough to have my, well, then soon to be first employer came in, and said, "Hey, who wants a junior job?" And and that was the time like everybody was doing their UCAS applications and applying for universities and things like that, and nobody else even applied for it, and I was the only one that went for it.
Yeah.
And I ended up getting a degree. I ended up finishing through the Open University, with Bournemouth University as well, and so I did it sort of. I learned on the job as I went, if you see. So I had loads of friends that went to university and now are programmers, but I just went about it in a slightly different way.
Wonderful.
Part laziness on my part, like because it's easier to get a job. But what I learnt in those, yeah, what I learnt in that first job stuck with me sort of ever since. It was the foundations of you know, me learning to code.
Sure, sure. Brilliant. So you did a course at at college, right? That
Yeah.
was coding. Is that
Yeah,
right?
so I actually did a BTEC,
Hmm.
and a BTEC, for anybody not in the UK, is it's kind of a more vocational qualification. There are no exams.
Mm.
It's just coursework based, and you
Hmm.
you just do projects. And I mean, I don't know about it now, but back when I did it, it was definitely the like inferior way to go. Really, like in terms of academia, it's you're
Yeah.
not going to go to a prestigious university with a BTEC, but what that did is I actually did software development day in, day out at college,
Wonderful.
and at that time, that was just more exciting to me than
Yeah.
going, and doing maths and physics, which is, maths, physics, then into comp science,
Mm.
and, that's just the path that I didn't take,
Sure.
at that time.
So what kind of things were you learning at uni?
So whilst so I did uni one day a week,
Uh-huh.
and I didn't really learn a lot because I was programming day to day.
Hmm.
So that was more of it was just something I felt I needed to do.
Sure.
And to be honest with you, looking back at it in my specific scenario, which is different to everybody else's, is that university degree was kind of pointless, really, because and that's hard for me to say. It wasn't pointless at all, but it's the amount of experience that I had when I finished my university
Hmm.
now, if jobs that I got after that point, they didn't even look at, they just wanted to know if I could code and what level I could code at, what projects had I been working, what was my experience. So you get to this point where you're a senior developer or, and it doesn't really matter what you did at university, because university is there to just prepare you for, in my opinion, for the real world.
Sure. No, I totally agree. I mean, the conversations I've had recently with recruitment agents, they don't ask about the university stuff. There's no need. They want to know what I coded last week.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the thing for me is back at that point, the people like my parents, my parents had at that point very different opinions about, university and, how prestigious that was. And they would have wanted me to go to university 100%. Right. And it does definitely, if you've never been to university up to a certain point, that's going to lock you out a specific employer. I don't think so much now, but back then it was different. It wasn't like it is now. There's definitely a shortage of programmers. So it's like, can you do the job? Yes. Are you a human? Yes. Yes, we'll give it a try, So I think it's not that simplistic, obviously, but it's not so much what Russell Group University did you go to and what grade did you get and all of those different things nowadays. Well, in my, and again, this is all my perspective in my very narrow viewpoint of my little place in the world, if you see what I mean. It's, that's just how I've never had an interaction where somebody's gone, oh, you didn't go to XYZ university.
No. No.
But then again, I haven't worked in a conventional role like that for a while. So, yeah.
Sure. So, okay. So after that, where did you take it from there? You say you got a job somewhere.
Yeah. So, where I learned, so I left college and I went straight into a junior developer job doing .NET. And I basically, the company was split over two sites. One was in Bath and one was down where I lived at that time in Weymouth, down in Dorset. Now, and in Dorset, we had like quite a small team. It was just me and one other senior developer. And the bigger team was sort of up in Bath. And I basically had free reign of the senior developer teaching me, everything I needed to know. And, I was still really good friends with him. He taught me to like properly code, and I worked in the defense sector. So the environment in which you work in is very controlled, and you don't have the luxuries. Well, and especially back then, especially old .NET as I call it, that was a very different time and a very different world. So it was really good, like, programming principles and underpinning, but it was quite boring and monotonous work, right? It was, sort of boring web systems, building things, and like I just alluded to back then, I don't want to hate on Microsoft at all, because I absolutely love them. But, .NET was in a very different place, right? It was very locked down. You could only run it on Windows, and, the transformation that they've made in recent years just wasn't there back then. So yes, it was the best part about it for me was I was taught the real underpinnings of how to build proper, like, enterprise ready software. Okay, and I didn't understand it all, like security testing and, building it in a scalable way that it can be extended upon, but also it was a consultancy firm. So it was like an agency. So I had to do many different things, and there was always a deadline with money. There was always a budget attached. Right. And I think, personally, every developer should have that in there, throughout their experience, because you just see the world in a completely different place when you only have X amount of days or weeks to produce something, right? And there is a profit margin to be made for that company. So
time equals money, and it's the whole sort of, if your code is not up to scratch, then it's going to cost money in the future for it to be fixed.
100%. And I think that, that sort of commercial aspect of it. And back then, I didn't even see it, right? Like I wish I could go back to that point in my life and not I don't have any regrets, but go back and tell old Sam, what I should be doing. And hindsight is obviously 2020. So, but and that's it. So that's where I sort of started from. And I think there were some mid-level devs, but most of them were all senior, right? So if we didn't have it wasn't agile. We didn't have stand-ups every day. But when we did come together, you just get that breadth of, knowledge, right? You have, the sort of, so you have some people driving new technology in, and then you've got these people that have been doing it for years, and not in a critical way. They're just saying, well, what about X, Y, and Z? And those are all the questions that you learn over time, right? All the mistakes that you've made over time. And,
definitely.
All that wisdom,
all the little edge cases, all the little things, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? What happens if this happens, and all this stuff. Yeah.
And that's a really productive environment, because it can be a bit slow at times, and everybody has an equal opinion. But it's just getting all of those viewpoints is sometimes a really good thing, especially when you're architecting a piece of software.
Well, this is something that I think you just can't really get in at university. It's that having the exposure to other developers who've been in the trenches.
I've through one of my sort of contracts that I've done, I was working with placement students in their third year of university, and those developers will pass a technical test, not a problem, but they haven't set up they've never deployed something to a server or set up Plesk or whatever the random things a client asks you to do. It's all of those edge. In that environment, everything was Dockerized. So no university that I know of teaches Docker, right? So who knows? At some point, I'm sure they will. But teaching them why Dockerized development environments are really important because, well, it's just time. We don't use it in development for anything else other than repeatability and time. So when we onboarded those placement students, they would just be given free rein to learn all of the the technical development. All of our environmental things first. It's I don't really care about whether you can code or not. That can come with time. It's more we already know that they can code because they've been taught code for 2 years at university, but it's about, deploying things securely, safely, and thinking about the whole software development lifecycle, not just writing back-end code, because that's not the lovely world that we live in. I wish my job was just writing back-end code, all day, every day, because then there would be nothing. It's a nice isolated environment, isn't it?
Yeah. So from there, where did you go? Did you go straight into working at Aptimize, or was there anything in between?
No. So I had another job. So after my first job, I then went and worked for a healthcare company, and I built a sort of their global e-commerce platform. They were sort of a B2B supplier, and back in those days, the cloud wasn't really what it is now. I say those days, it wasn't that long ago, but it wasn't where it is now. They didn't have the money to buy a big ERP system, so they built everything bespoke. And so we did that. I was there for 3 years. We built that all up and everything. And and that was pure .NET, bespoke application development. Not maybe the way that you would go now, but back then it was completely functional for what it was. But again, really small development team. There was only a designer and 3 developers there. It wasn't, well, it's still pretty big compared to like a freelancer, right? But so not a huge team. Did 3 years there, and then towards the end of that, I started to do freelance work on the side. That became far too much because I was just doing it every night and every weekend. I sort of traded my gaming for freelancing, which worked well financially, but it didn't work well in any other aspect of my life. So I just made the decision, my wife, who was my girlfriend then, basically gave me the best ultimatum ever. She was like, you either do it full time or you stop.
We need that. I think us freelancers need that reality check.
Because it's great, earning as much money as you possibly can, but you have to have that balance, even if you don't. Like at that stage of my life, my daughter wasn't here. It was just me and my wife, but it's still, burnout is a real thing. If you do every single evening, every single weekend, you will, for me personally, I will eventually crash. So it's about doing it, safe, nothing's really unsafe about programming, but, in a safe manner that is got longevity to it, right? It's got to work for the long term for everyone. So I made the jump. I was working with a couple of agencies on the side. So I had plenty of, at the time, I already had like 2 or 3 clients that were regularly giving me little bits, and some of the work wasn't even really little. We were doing loads of work, to get stuff done.
May I just spin it back a bit? How did you come up with the idea in the first place of wanting to go freelance?
I think to start off with, I did a couple of projects through sort of friends and family. So I had I did some work for one of my dad's friends, and little bits like, can you make me a website, and all of those. But I'm no way a designer at all, right? So I'm definitely a developer, that's for sure. You don't want to ask me about my design opinion. I'm not very good at that. So I would help people with little bits like that, and then one day I think I got a link. I think I got a LinkedIn from somebody, and he was basically, I've got some, and he was the owner of an agency, and he's like, I've got a small little bit of work. And I was quite flexible with that company that I worked for. I didn't actually work. It was like a 34-hour week. It was amazing. And so I used that extra time. And I basically said to him, look, I can't do it full time, but if you've got any projects that, aren't time sensitive or they're small, then, send them my way. I'd be happy to work on them. So I did a few projects with them, and it just started to snowball from there. Because once you've got a client and you've delivered value and you're trustworthy, especially with agencies, they always want everything done in house first, but they invariably have a little bit that they need to sub out to somebody else, right? Agencies are a good way to get some reliable work. It's not potentially the best value work, but there's definitely a supply of extra work there. Yeah,
you're essentially being subcontracted out, aren't you? You're working as a developer on their team, but for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you're sort of as and when you're needed. But I think the problem that a lot of people have is how do you find that first one, right? Like, how do you get that connection? And I think, looking back on it, I didn't do anything to get that connection, right? It was just pot luck that me and that person started to talk. But if you were to actively sort of hunt for that, I think it's more about being known. And one thing I'm going to be critical of myself, and I will be critical throughout this whole thing about myself. The one thing I'm not very good at is marketing myself, right? I don't do any social, I don't do anything like that. And I think just being available and open to opportunities, but then you have to be connected with the person, right? They have to know who you are, because there's loads of amazing coders out there that, that want work, but just nobody knows who they are or what they do, right? Because they don't go to meetups, or they don't go to, and people just don't know about them. And I think that's just being known. Like, I think that's the only way, to really, and it is slow, right? It's like it's a cumulative effect, right? Everything in life is if we take YouTube, for instance, right, let's talk about your 10,000, followers, subscribers, I can't remember. Yes, subscribers. It's not, you don't just wake up tomorrow with 10,000 subscribers, do you? No. It's you've got to build it up. And I think that's the same analogy that you would, in terms of your brand. If you don't, I don't really like to call it brand because it's quite a wafty term, but your brand is your trustworthiness and your trustworthiness and your deliverability. Does Sam turn up on time? Does he do the job he says he's going to do? Is he flexible? If we ask him to do a deployment late at night, will he shift around his day to do it? And all of those different things. I think that all makes up your personal brand, and however people discover your brand might just be through word of mouth and referral.
Did you always think that you wanted to be a freelancer?
Yes, that's the reason why I went freelance is because I couldn't leave the question unanswered of whether I could do it or not. So for me, it was like the what if, right? So the worst thing that was going to happen to me, because I had prepared for it financially, is that I would lose 3 or 6 months worth of money, right? That's the short and tall of it. Mm-hmm. But on the flip side of that, I would have gained 3 or 6 months worth of knowledge. So actually, yes, it would have been an expensive mistake, but at least you would be able to close that door on your life. Do you see what I mean? That's not for me, or that doesn't work for me.
Yeah, I like that. I really do. That's such a pragmatic way of looking at it.